Átame, dijo la mujer apache al ranchero que la compró para liberarla. El hombre solitario no sabía.
The sun was just beginning to rise over the rugged hills of Sonora, casting long shadows across the dusty landscape.
Jose, a man of few words and even fewer companions, stirred from his sleep in the small cabin he had built with his own hands. Life had always been quiet for him, almost painfully so. Days were filled with tending to the small herd of cattle he owned, repairing fences, and wandering the hills to check for signs of predators. He had chosen this life of solitude long ago, finding comfort in the rhythm of nature and the steady work of his hands. But today, something felt different, though he could not yet put his finger on it. Earlier that morning, a traveling merchant had arrived at Jose's cabin. The man's horse was tired, his clothes dusty, and his eyes held the look of someone who had seen too much of the harsh world. He carried with him tales from nearby towns and markets, and Jose had grown accustomed to listening politely, though rarely was he moved by the stories he heard. Today, however, the merchant spoke of something that stirred a strange mix of curiosity and unease in Jose. "There is a woman," the merchant said, leaning on his staff and shading his eyes against the sun, "being sold in the market down the valley. She is Apache, captured during a raid." "She is alone, and they say she is unlike anyone else." Jose felt a chill run down his spine, though he could not explain why.
It was not the idea of danger that unsettled him, for he had faced his share of storms and wild animals, nor was it the thought of people, for he had always avoided them.
Psst. No, it was the mystery of the woman herself that caught his attention. Something about the way the merchant spoke, hesitant, almost reverent, made Jose feel as if he were being told of a rare and fragile treasure. Without thinking too much, Jose made a decision. He would go. But he would see this woman with his own eyes. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was a desire to do some small good in a world that often felt cruel. Great. Either way, he saddled his horse and set off toward the market, the dusty trail stretching ahead like a ribbon of promise and uncertainty. When he arrived, the market was bustling with activity. Merchants shouted their wares. Children ran between stalls, and the smell of cooked food and leather filled the air. But Jose did not notice any of it. His eyes were drawn to a small, quiet corner of the market, where a woman was seated on a wooden crate. She was not bound with chains, yet her posture seemed restrained, as if she were holding herself back. Breath. Her eyes were dark and sharp, and they flicked toward him immediately, assessing him, reading him, before he could even approach. "Átame," she said, her voice calm but commanding. The words were foreign to him at first, but he understood enough Spanish to know what they meant. "Tie me." Jose froze. He had expected to find a woman in need of rescue, frightened and helpless, but these words confused him. Tie her. Why would she want that? Was it a trick, a test, or perhaps some kind of warning? He took a cautious step forward. "Are you asking me to tie you?" he asked, unsure whether he was speaking boldly or foolishly. She met his gaze without hesitation.
"Yes," she said simply.
"Tie me. Then you will understand." Her confidence unnerved him, yet it also sparked something inside him he had not felt in a long time. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was a sense of responsibility. Bration had spent years alone, and he had learned to rely only on himself. But something about this woman, so composed, so fearless, made him feel the stirrings of connection, of a challenge that he could not ignore. He approached slowly, reaching for the rope he carried for the horses. She did not flinch, did not resist. Her trust, or perhaps her demand, was absolute. He hesitated, but she only looked at him, unwavering. Carefully, he followed her instructions, tying her hands gently. When he was done, he stepped back, expecting resistance or fear. But instead, she simply nodded, as if confirming that the act itself had been understood.
"You are brave," she said softly, almost a whisper, yet there was power in her words.
Perhaps foolish. Time will tell. Jose did not respond. He felt a strange mix of fear and awe.
Not at her, but at the realization that he had entered into a moment that was larger than either of them.
It was as if the universe had chosen this encounter, and neither could turn away from it. The merchant watched from a distance, saying nothing. He had told Jose that the woman's name was Tayan, and that she had been captured during a raid on her village. Her people had fought fiercely, but the odds had been against them. Tayan had survived, not just because of strength, but because of intelligence, cunning, and an ability to read others in a way that few could. Jose wanted to know more, but he also felt the weight of respect pressing down on him. He could not treat her like a commodity, nor could he treat her like a simple charge to be protected. She was more than that. He felt it deep in his bones, a sense that her story would change his life, just as his presence had somehow changed hers. Why did you want me to tie you?" he asked finally, unable to contain his curiosity. Tayan's lips curved in the faintest smile, and her eyes softened just slightly.
"You will see," she said.
"In time, you will understand why I asked. But first, you must trust me, as I must trust you." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and profound. Jose had lived his life trusting very few, relying on the rhythm of the land and the honesty of his own labor. But Tayan, she demanded a different kind of trust, one that involved letting go, one that involved entering into an unknown together. It was frightening, yet exhilarating. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jose made another decision. He would buy her freedom. He would take responsibility for her, not because it was easy, but because it felt right. He could not explain why, but a quiet certainty had settled in his heart. He handed the merchant the coins, exchanged a few words, and led Tayan away from the market. The ride back to his cabin was silent at first. The wind whispered through the dry grass and the horse's hooves kicked up clouds of dust. Jose glanced at Tayan, but she said nothing, only watching the landscape with a keen awareness. He realized that she was taking in every detail, the position of the sun, the scent of the earth, the subtle movements in the hills. She was learning as much as he was learning from her. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was high overhead, and the world seemed smaller, more intimate. Jose helped Tayan down from the horse, still unsure of what the next days would bring. But one thing was certain. Life as he knew it had changed. The quiet routine of solitude had been disrupted, replaced by the presence of someone whose story, whose spirit, demanded attention and respect. That night they sat by the fire, the flames dancing and casting shadows across their faces. Jose could not stop thinking about her words, about the way she had commanded him to tie her, and what it truly meant. Breath. Tayan spoke little, but each word she chose was deliberate, precise, as if measured against some inner standard that he could only begin to guess. Jose knew that this was only the beginning. There would be questions, challenges, and dangers ahead. But he also knew that he could not turn back. In Tayan, he had found not just a companion but a force of nature, wild, unpredictable, and utterly human. And for the first time in years he felt a spark of life he had thought lost, a connection that went beyond words, beyond explanation. As he lay down that night, the wind rustling through the trees outside, Jose understood one thing clearly. His life once quiet and simple, had become a story waiting to unfold, and Tayan was at the heart of it. Narration. The mysterious woman who had asked him to tie her had not only entered his life, she had transformed it, and the journey ahead would test both of them in ways neither could yet imagine. And so, under the silent stars, the two of them rested, one tied in body, yet free in spirit, the other solitary, yet strangely tethered to this extraordinary stranger.
The first part of their story had ended, but the true adventure, the journey of trust, survival, and understanding, was only beginning.
The morning sun rose over the hills again, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and gold. Jose was awake early, as always, tending to the small herd of cattle grazing near his cabin. The quiet rhythm of the land was familiar to him, but today it felt different. Tayan was awake as well, moving silently by the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the horizon with a careful intensity that reminded Jose of a hawk watching its prey. He had learned one thing quickly. Tayan was not a woman to be underestimated. Though she had been purchased to be freed, she carried with her an air of quiet authority. Every movement, every glance seemed purposeful. Jose could sense her strength, not just in her body, but in her mind. She observed, analyzed, and made judgments without a word, and yet her presence commanded attention. After breakfast, which Jose had prepared, simply cornmeal porridge and dried meat, he tried to speak with her. "Tell me more about yourself," he said gently. "Where you came from, what you've seen. It might help me understand why you asked me to tie you yesterday."
Tayan looked at him, her dark eyes thoughtful.
For a long moment she said nothing, as if weighing whether he was ready to hear her truth. Then she spoke, her voice soft but unwavering, breath. "My village was far from here," she began, "across rivers and hills where the land is green and the sky feels wide. My people, we lived close to the earth, learned its secrets, and respected its power. But one day, that peace ended. Raiders came at night. Fire and screams. I lost everything that night." Josie felt a lump form in his throat. He had heard tales of raids before, but to hear it from someone who had lived it, who had survived it against impossible odds, made it real in a way stories never could. He did not speak. He simply listened. Tayan continued, her voice steady, recounting her journey after the raid, the capture, the struggle to survive, and the small acts of cunning that kept her alive when everything else seemed lost. "I learned quickly," she said, "to trust only myself." To watch, to listen, to move like the wind. Freedom is not just walking outside, it is knowing when to act and when to wait. That is why I asked you to tie me. Not to be trapped, but to see if you would follow through, to see if I could rely on you when the time came. Trust is earned in small acts, and I wanted to see if you could understand that. Jose was struck silent. He had thought of trust in simple terms, friendship, loyalty, honesty, but Tayan spoke of it in a way that was deeper, almost sacred. She did not speak of trust as something given freely. She spoke of it as a bond forged through understanding and courage. He realized then that the rope had been a test, not of strength, but of his ability to follow, to respect, and to act without fear or hesitation. Over the next few days, Jose and Tayan began a routine that was part work, part learning. Jose showed her the land, how to care for the cattle, how to move quietly through the hills without startling animals, and how to make shelter from the simplest materials. Tayan, in turn, taught him things he had never considered. How to read the tracks of small animals to find water, how to notice changes in the wind to predict weather, and how to stay calm when danger was near. Their lessons often took them far from the cabin. One morning, as they followed the tracks of a deer, Tayan stopped abruptly, kneeling on the ground. Jose watched as she traced a line in the dirt with her finger. "See these marks?" she asked. These are fresh. Someone else passed this way recently. A group, traveling lightly, moving fast. They could be hunters, or worse. Always be aware, even when it seems safe. Jose felt a shiver run down his spine. He had always been cautious, but Tayen's attention to detail opened his eyes to a world he had barely noticed. He realized that she had survived not just through courage, but through careful observation and quick thinking. She had learned to see the unseen, to anticipate danger before it struck, and to act without hesitation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they returned to the cabin, tired from a day of tracking and learning. Tayen sat quietly by the fire, sharpening a small knife she had carried with her, while Jose prepared a simple meal. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Jose realized that in her presence, he felt both challenged and protected. He could not explain why, but he felt a sense of purpose he had not known in years. Tayen looked up at him and spoke again. "You will need to learn more than survival," she said. "You will need to understand people. Not just their words, but their intentions, their fears, their desires. You cannot rely only on strength. The world is full of those who take what they want without thought. Psst. To survive, you must see through them."
Jose nodded, understanding that her lessons were not only about the land or the animals, but about life itself.
He had lived alone for so long, thinking that solitude was protection, that distance kept him safe. But Tayen showed him that true safety came from knowledge, awareness, and trust. Trust in oneself and in those who prove themselves worthy. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them grew stronger. Jose began to notice small things about Tayen that made him respect her even more. The way she moved with precision, the quiet confidence in her eyes, and the way she could read a situation before anyone else did.
She was a teacher as much as a survivor, and Jose was eager to learn.
One afternoon, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the wind howled through the hills. Jose and Tayen hurried to secure the cattle and gather firewood, but the storm was relentless. Rain soaked them to the bone, and lightning split the sky with sudden brightness. In that moment, Jose realized something profound. Tayen's strength was not in defiance of the world, but in harmony with it. She did not fight the storm blindly. She adapted, observed, and acted with clarity. After the storm passed, they sat together in silence, drying by the fire. Tayen's expression was thoughtful.
"The world is full of storms, Jose," she said softly.
"Some are in the sky, some in the hearts of men. You must learn to read both, brave. And you must learn to stand when others fall." Jose listened, feeling the weight of her words. He had faced storms in life, loss, loneliness, hardship, but he had never thought of them as lessons. Tayen had shown him that every challenge was an opportunity to grow, to understand, and to prepare for what lay ahead. As night fell, he thought about the journey that had begun with a simple command, Átame. What had seemed strange and even frightening at first was now clear in its purpose. Tayen had not asked for bondage. She had asked for connection, for the chance to see if he could meet her in understanding and respect. She had tested him, and in passing that test he had begun a journey of transformation. Jose realized that he had changed in ways he could not have anticipated. He was no longer just a solitary man tending cattle on a quiet hill. He was part of a story that involved trust, survival, and understanding. And Tayen, with her quiet strength and sharp mind, was at the center of it all. That night, as the fire burned low and the wind whispered through the trees, Jose understood something he had never admitted to himself. He was no longer afraid, not of the world, not of danger, not of the unknown. With Tayen by his side, He felt capable of facing anything. And for the first time in many years, he felt a sense of belonging, not just to the land, but to the journey of life itself. Best. In the days that followed, Jose and Tayan continued their work together. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new understandings. They learned from each other, grew together, and began to form a bond that neither had expected. It was not just survival they were learning. It was life in all its complexity, its danger, and its beauty. And so, the second part of their story unfolded. Jose, the solitary rancher, was no longer alone. He had found a companion, a teacher, and a friend. Tayan, the Apache woman who had survived so much, had found someone who could understand her, who could follow her lead, and who could respect her strength. Together, they were beginning a journey that would test them, change them, and ultimately show them what it meant to trust, survive, and live fully in a world that often demanded both courage and wisdom. The morning air was crisp and smelled of wet earth after the recent storm. Jose rose early, as he always did, but today he felt a sense of anticipation he could not shake. Tayan was already awake, standing at the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the distant hills. There was a sharpness to her gaze, an alertness that reminded Jose that survival was never just about strength. It was about attention, about knowing the land and understanding the world around them. They had been together for several weeks now, and each day Jose felt himself learning more than he ever had in years of solitude. Tayan had a way of teaching without forcing lessons, guiding him subtly while making him see for himself. Bray. She did not speak of fear or courage lightly. Every word, every gesture carried purpose. Jose respected her in ways he could not have imagined when he first bought her freedom. He had thought he was rescuing her, but in truth, she was teaching him about life, about trust, and about the strength of the human spirit.
That morning, Tayan proposed a journey beyond the hills surrounding Jose's cabin.
"We need to travel," she said simply. "There is a place where the water is clear, where the land provides. It will teach you more than this hill ever could, and it will keep us safe for now." Jose hesitated for a moment, thinking of his simple life, the cattle and the small comforts of home. But he knew that Tayan's experience and judgment far surpassed his own. He nodded, trusting her instincts. They packed lightly, taking only essentials, a few blankets, dried meat, water, and tools. Tayan carried a small knife at her belt and a pouch with seeds and herbs she said might be useful. The journey began slowly. They walked side by side, their horses following at a gentle pace. Jose noticed how Tayan moved, deliberate, careful, aware of every sound and movement. She stopped often, pointing out tracks in the dirt, changes in the wind, or the distant call of a bird that indicated the presence of water. Jose tried to mimic her attentiveness, but he often missed subtle signs that Tayan caught immediately. As they moved farther from the safety of the hills, Tayan began to speak of her past more openly. She told Jose about the times she had been captured and how she had learned to survive by observing people, understanding their intentions, and moving silently when danger approached.
"Survival is not just about running," she said.
"It is about thinking ahead, seeing the unseen, and knowing when to act. Many die not because they are weak, but because they fail to notice what is right in front of them." Pray. Jose listened carefully, feeling a mix of awe and humility. He had faced challenges in life, but he had rarely thought in such strategic terms. Tayan's perspective opened his eyes to a larger world, one where danger could come from both the land and from people, and where knowledge and awareness were as important as strength. One afternoon, they came across a narrow canyon where a small stream ran through the rocks. Tayan signaled Jose to stop and knelt beside the water, studying the tracks left by small animals. "These tracks are fresh," she said. "Someone else passed this way. They moved quickly, lightly. Not hunters. Not wild animals. aspirations. Others, possibly men who could be dangerous. Jose's heart raced. He had never considered that people might be moving through these hills unnoticed, watching, waiting. Tayan's observation made him realize that danger was not always obvious, and that survival required constant attention. He followed her lead as she guided him through the canyon, avoiding loose rocks and areas where someone could hide. Her knowledge of the terrain was remarkable, and Jose began to see the hills not just as home, but as a map full of signs and warnings. As the day wore on, they made camp near a grove of trees beside the stream. Tayan moved quietly, gathering firewood and preparing a small area for cooking. Jose helped, but he often found himself watching her, amazed at how much she understood the land. She seemed to know which plants were safe, which insects were harmless, and which areas might conceal predators. Every movement she made was precise, purposeful, and filled with knowledge born of experience and necessity. That night, under a sky full of stars, they sat by the fire. Tayan roasted small pieces of meat over the flames, while Jose stirred the coals, trying to keep them steady. The air was cool, and the sound of the stream nearby added a sense of calm to the wilderness. Tayan looked at Jose with a serious expression. "You are learning quickly," she said, "but there is more than survival here. You must also learn to understand people, their intentions, their fears, their desires. Not all dangers come from the wild, but some come from men. You must read them as carefully as you read the land." Brash. Jose nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had lived a quiet, solitary life, trusting only himself. But Tayan was teaching him that survival required more than strength or courage. It required perception, understanding, and trust. Not blind trust, but careful, earned trust. The following days were filled with lessons and challenges. Tayan guided Jose through dense forests, across rocky ridges, and along hidden paths. She taught him how to find food, purify water, and identify safe places to rest. She also taught him patience, how to wait, watch, and plan before taking action. Jose began to realize that these skills were not just practical. They were a way of seeing the world, a way of living in harmony with it. During one particularly difficult day, they encountered a narrow pass where the ground was unstable and rocks threatened to slide at the slightest misstep. Jose's heart pounded as he navigated the path, but Tayan moved with calm precision, placing each foot carefully, testing the ground before committing her weight. She extended her hand to him, guiding him step by step. For the first time, Jose felt the true meaning of trust. He could have slipped, fallen, or panicked, but her guidance gave him confidence. When they reached solid ground on the other side, Jose looked at Tayan with newfound respect. "I see now," he said quietly. "Brit. Trust. It is not just about belief. It is about reliance, about knowing someone will act when it matters." Tayan nodded, a faint smile on her lips.
Exactly. Trust is earned, not given freely.
And sometimes it is the difference between life and death. The journey was not without moments of fear. One evening as they approached a clearing, Jose noticed footprints that were too large to be animals. Tayan paused, crouching behind a bush, her eyes scanning the area.
"Men," she whispered. "They are close."
"Quiet. Watch how I move, and follow exactly. Do not speak. Do not make a sound." Jose followed her instructions, his heart racing. They moved silently, using the shadows to remain unseen. The men passed nearby, unaware of their presence. Jose realized that Tayan's lessons were not just about survival. They were about observation, strategy, and calm under pressure. He felt his confidence growing, and with it, a deep respect for the woman who had taught him so much in so little time. By the time they reached a safe resting place that night, Jose understood that the journey was changing him. He was no longer just a solitary rancher. He was a companion, a student, and a partner in a delicate dance of survival. Tayan, too, had changed in subtle ways. She had begun to share more of herself, more of her story, and her trust in him had grown. As they sat by the fire, Jose reflected on how far they had come. The rope that had tied Tayan's hands in the market now seemed almost symbolic. A beginning, a test, a bond that had led to understanding. He realized that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about connection, trust, and learning from each other. Tayan looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "The world is vast, Jose," she said. Breath. "And it can be cruel, but it can also be full of knowledge, beauty, and strength. You have learned much already, but there is more ahead. Be ready." Jose nodded, feeling a sense of readiness he had never known. With Tayan by his side, he felt capable of facing the challenges ahead. He understood that their journey was more than a physical one. It was a journey of growth, trust, and understanding. And so, as the night deepened and the stars shone brightly above, Jose and Tayan rested, knowing that each day brought new lessons, new dangers, and new opportunities to grow together. The bond between them had deepened, and with it the story of their lives had become intertwined, a tale of survival, trust, and the quiet power of human connection. The sun had barely risen when Jose awoke to the sound of distant movement. The hills were quiet, yet there was a tension in the air that made his heart beat faster. Tayan was already awake, sitting near the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the horizon with a sharp intensity. Breath. But the way she moved, alert, precise, ready, told Jose that danger was near. "Something is coming," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "We are not alone. Pay attention." Breaths. Jose nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and focus. He had learned much from Tayan. The art of observation, the importance of patience, and the value of understanding the land. But this was different. This threat was not the wild animals they had tracked or the storms they had endured. This was human, deliberate, and potentially deadly. Tayan had spoken little of the people who had captured her before, but now the past seemed to catch up with them. She explained quietly, "The men who sold me, they have not forgotten. They follow those who survive. Liberation. They believe they can still control what they could not destroy." Jose felt a chill. He had imagined that buying her freedom had separated her from danger, but now he realized that freedom came with its own perils. Tayan's past was not just a story. It was a shadow always present, always moving just beyond their sight. They packed quickly, moving with the precision Tayan had taught him. Every step was calculated, every sound considered. They avoided the main paths and took hidden trails through the hills. Tayan pointed out small details, a broken branch, a footprint in the mud, a bent blade of grass. That indicated the approach of others. Jose followed her lead, his confidence growing with each careful move. He realized that trust was no longer abstract. It was survival itself. By mid-morning, they had reached a narrow canyon, the walls rising steeply on either side. Tayan stopped, crouched low, and gestured for Jose to do the same. "They are close," she whispered. "2 men, lightly armed." First, they move carefully. They think they are unseen, but we know better. Jose felt a rush of adrenaline. He had faced wild animals and storms, but there was a new fear in the presence of human hunters, the calculated intent in their footsteps, the danger in their silence. Tayan's calmness, however, grounded him. She had faced similar threats before, and survived. Bah. He trusted her guidance implicitly. They waited, hidden behind rocks and shrubs, until the men passed within a few feet of their position. Jose held his breath, barely daring to move. Tayan's hand brushed his shoulder, a small signal to stay still. The men did not notice them and continued down the canyon, their presence fading into the distance. Jose exhaled slowly, feeling both relief and awe. He had witnessed firsthand Tayan's skill, her ability to read danger before it even arrived. After the men were gone, Tayan led Jose to a safe place higher up in the hills, where they could rest and observe the surrounding land. This is why I asked you to trust me, she said. Because when danger comes, hesitation can be deadly. You have learned to follow, to watch, to understand. That is why you are alive now.
Jose nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. He realized that the journey they had undertaken was more than physical. It was a test of character, patience, and courage.
Every lesson Tayan had taught him, every skill she had shared, had prepared him for this moment. As they rested, Tayan began to speak of her past in more detail, revealing not just the events but the emotions, the strategies, and the resilience that had carried her through.
When they first captured me, she said, I had nothing but my mind and my will. I watched, I listened, I waited.
Ray, I learned the patterns of their movements, their weaknesses, and I acted when the time was right. Survival is not about fighting blindly. It is about knowing when to move, when to wait, and when to strike. Jose listened, captivated. He had always thought of survival in simple terms: escape, endurance, strength, but Tayan's experience showed him a deeper, more thoughtful approach. It was about strategy, observation, and mental resilience. Every story she told, every lesson she shared, was a step toward understanding not just survival, but life itself. Later that afternoon, they continued their journey, moving cautiously through the hills. Tayan taught Jose how to leave false trails, how to use natural cover to remain unseen, and how to anticipate human behavior based on small cues. Jose practiced diligently, realizing that these skills were more than tools. They were lifelines.
As they navigated a narrow ridge, Tayan suddenly stopped, her eyes narrowing.
Despew, listen, she whispered. Jose paused, straining his ears. Far below, the faint sound of voices reached them, accompanied by the crunch of footsteps on dry earth. Tayan crouched, pointing out the hidden paths they could take to avoid detection. The men below were the same who had followed them through the canyon. They were searching, determined, and dangerous. Jose felt a surge of fear, but also a deep trust in Tayan. He followed her lead, moving silently, adjusting his steps to the rhythm she indicated. The wind shifted, carrying scents and sounds, and Tayan used it to their advantage, guiding Jose down a hidden slope that led them out of sight.
Hours later, they found a secluded grove where they could rest safely.
Tayan built a small shelter using branches and leaves, explaining to Jose how the placement would conceal them from both sight and scent. As night fell, they sat by a small fire, their faces illuminated by its warm glow. The danger had passed, but the tension lingered. Tayan spoke softly, almost to herself. Great. The past never leaves us completely. It follows in shadows, in whispers, in those who think they can control what they could not destroy. But it also teaches us strength, patience, and cunning. You must remember that, Jose. Not everything is as it seems, Jose nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He had thought of danger as something physical, something to fight or flee from. But Tayan showed him that true danger could be subtle, psychological, and relentless. Survival required more than courage. It required understanding, foresight, and the ability to anticipate the moves of others. In the following days, they continued to evade pursuit, using all the skills Tien had taught him. Jose began to see the hills as a living map, full of signs, paths, and hidden passages. He learned to read the language of nature, to anticipate storms, and to move silently. But he also learned the language of people, the subtle cues, the small gestures, the intentions behind actions. One evening, as they rested beside a stream, Tien shared a moment of reflection.
I have survived because I understood the world, not just because I was strong, she said. You have learned well, Jose.
But remember, survival is not just about evading danger. It is about understanding life, respecting it, and making choices that honor both yourself and those you care about. Jose felt a deep sense of respect and gratitude. Tien had taught him more than survival skills. She had taught him perspective, patience, and the importance of trust. He realized that their journey was shaping him into a different man, one who could face challenges with awareness, courage, and careful thought. The bond between them deepened, built not just on survival but on mutual respect and understanding. Jose saw in Tien a combination of strength and wisdom that inspired him to grow, to learn, and to trust in ways he had never known. And Tien, in turn, began to rely on Jose's steadiness, his willingness to learn, and his courage in the face of danger. As the days turned into weeks, the threat of pursuit faded, but the lessons remained. Jose understood now why Tien had asked to be tied, why she had tested him in the market, and why she had guided him with such care. Breaths. Trust, strategy, and awareness were the keys to survival, and to life itself. By the time they reached a safer area beyond the hills, Jose felt transformed. He was no longer just a solitary rancher. He was a partner in a journey that had tested his mind, his courage, and his understanding. Tien had led him through challenges that had forced him to grow, to observe, and to trust in ways he never thought possible. And as they rested that night, under a sky full of stars, Jose realized something profound. Their journey was not just about evading danger. It was about connection, trust, and learning from each other. Tien's past, once a source of fear, had become a teacher, guiding them both toward understanding, resilience, and the quiet power of human spirit. The first light of dawn painted the hills in soft gold and pink, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Jose woke with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The past weeks had tested him in ways he could not have imagined, forcing him to learn, observe, and grow alongside Tien. He had come to understand her strength, her wisdom, and the delicate balance of trust that had been woven between them. But today felt different. There was a sense that their journey, which had begun with uncertainty and fear, was nearing a turning point. Tien was already awake, standing silently on a ridge above the cabin, looking out over the hills. Her posture was calm but alert, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Jose joined her quietly, sensing her focus and feeling a renewed respect for the vigilance that had guided them through countless challenges. For the first time, he saw not only her strength, but her freedom, a freedom she had fought to reclaim, and one that she was now willing to share with him in a different way.
We have come far, she said softly, her voice carrying over the wind.
But there is one last challenge. Those who follow me will not give up easily. They believe they can take what they lost. We must be ready. He glances around in despair. He had learned to trust her judgment implicitly, and he had also learned to trust himself. He was no longer the solitary man who had lived quietly on the hills. He had grown, guided by Tien's lessons in survival, observation, and patience. Now, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead, not with fear, but with understanding. They spent the morning preparing carefully. Tayan inspected their surroundings, identifying vantage points, hidden paths, and potential risks. Jose helped, carrying supplies and observing her methods closely. He had come to appreciate that every action Tayan took was deliberate and purposeful, rooted in experience and awareness. She had survived the worst, and her strategies were lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. As the sun climbed higher, distant voices reached their ears. The men who had pursued Tayan were closing in, their presence undeniable. Jose felt a surge of adrenaline, but he remembered Tayan's words. Observe, plan, act carefully. Together, they moved to a higher ridge, using the terrain to their advantage. From this position, they could see the approach of their pursuers and anticipate their movements. Tayan's eyes narrowed as she studied the men below.
They believe they can surprise us, she said. But we know the land, and we know each other.
We will not be caught. Bebeta. Ghost felt a wave of determination. He had followed her guidance through countless challenges, and now he would rely on what he had learned to face this final test. They waited patiently, hidden by rocks and shrubs, watching as the pursuers moved closer. Each movement was deliberate, each step measured. Jose realized that he had come to understand not just the land, but the subtle cues of human behavior, the hesitation in a step, the direction of a glance. When the men reached a narrow pass, Tayan signaled Jose. Together, they moved swiftly and silently, using hidden paths to flank the pursuers. Jose felt a mix of fear and confidence as they approached, but he trusted Tayan completely. Her experience and his newfound awareness created a seamless partnership, each anticipating the other's movements. The confrontation was brief but decisive. Tayan's knowledge of the terrain, combined with Jose's growing skill and calm, allowed them to outmaneuver the men. The pursuers, realizing they had underestimated their opponents, were forced to retreat. Jose watched as they disappeared into the distance. Their threat diminished, and he felt a profound sense of relief. The danger had passed, and their journey of survival and trust had reached its climax. After the men were gone, Tayan and Jose descended to the valley below, where the land opened into a peaceful grove beside a clear stream. The sunlight reflected off the water, creating a sense of calm that contrasted sharply with the tension of the previous days. They set up a small camp, tending to their horses and preparing a meal. For the first time in weeks, there was no immediate danger, and the quiet allowed them to reflect on what they had endured. Tayan sat by the stream, watching the water flow. "Freedom is not just about leaving danger behind," she said. "It is about knowing how to live, how to trust, and how to understand the world around you. We have survived because we observed, adapted, and trusted each other. But now we can also live with intention." Jose listened, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and respect. He had learned so much from her, skills, strategies, and lessons that went beyond survival. He had learned about patience, observation, trust, and the strength of the human spirit. He realized that Tayan had not just survived her past, she had taught him to face life fully, without fear, and with understanding. They spent the next few days in the grove, resting and learning together. Jose practiced what Tayan had taught him, honing his skills in observation and survival. Tayan shared more of her stories, not just of danger but of life before captivity. The customs, the land, the people she had loved. Jose listened attentively, absorbing not just the facts but the emotions, the depth, and the resilience that had carried her through so much. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, casting a warm glow over the grove, Tayan spoke again. "You have changed, Jose," she said. "You are no longer just a man who lives in solitude. You have learned to see, to understand, and to trust." That is a strength that few possess. You are ready to face the world, not just survive it. Breaths. Jose felt a swell of emotion. He had never imagined that he could grow in such ways, that a simple act of buying someone's freedom could lead to such profound lessons. He looked at Tayan, seeing not just a woman who had survived so much, but a teacher, a companion, and a friend. As the night settled in, they sat by the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows across their faces. Jose reflected on their journey, from the first moment in the market when Tayan had asked him to tie her, to the challenges they had faced together in the hills and valleys. He realized that every step had been a lesson, every danger a test, and every moment an opportunity to grow. Tayan watched the stars above, her expression thoughtful. "The world will always have challenges," she said. "But now, you know how to face them." Trust, awareness, patience. These are the tools that guide us. And you have learned them well. Jose nodded, feeling a sense of completion and readiness. He understood that their journey was not just about escaping danger or surviving threats. It was about connection, trust, and understanding. Tayan had shown him the power of resilience, the importance of observation, and the depth of human strength. The next morning, they prepared to continue their journey, not out of fear, but out of choice. The land stretched before them, full of possibilities, challenges, and opportunities for growth. Jose felt a sense of freedom he had never known, not just because danger had passed, but because he had learned to face life fully, with understanding and trust. Tayan walked beside him, her steps confident and purposeful. She had regained her freedom, not just physically, but in spirit. Jose had gained more than survival skills. He had gained perspective, connection, and the knowledge that trust, once earned, could transform a life. As they reached a hilltop overlooking the valley below, Jose felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had changed him, shaping him into someone capable of facing the world with awareness and courage. Tayan, too, had found a measure of peace, knowing that she could navigate life with trust in herself and in those she allowed close. They spent the afternoon in quiet reflection, watching the sun set over the hills. Jose understood that the lessons they had learned together would stay with him forever. Lessons of survival, trust, observation, and resilience. Tayan had taught him more than he could have imagined, and their journey, which had begun with uncertainty and fear, had become a story of growth, understanding, and connection. As night fell, Jose and Tayan sat by the fire, the stars above shining brightly. They knew that life would continue to hold challenges, but they also knew that they were prepared. They had faced danger, survived, and learned to trust. They had grown together, and their bond had become a source of strength and inspiration. In the quiet of the night, Jose realized that he was no longer the solitary man who had lived alone on the hills. He had found a companion, a teacher, and a friend. Tayan had survived unimaginable hardships, and in doing so, had taught him the true meaning of trust, resilience, and the human spirit. And so, as the fire burned low and the stars reflected in the stream, Jose and Tayan rested, ready to face the world together. Their journey had tested them, shaped them, and transformed them. They had discovered that freedom was not just the absence of danger, but the presence of understanding, trust, and connection. And in that knowledge they found not just survival, but life itself.